And it's my pleasure then tonight to introduce Adam Ford, who is one of the leading thinkers and promoters of the ideas of transhumanism in Australia. He's been organising and participating in a number of conferences on futurism and on the way technology is going to be developing over the next 50, 100 years, and the way it's going to affect us, the way that the accelerating rate of technological change is going to affect us sooner than we think it's going to. And he's also on the board of the International Humanity Plus, H Plus organisation, so he's the sort of Australian representative on that. So he's a very worthy speaker, he knows this topic very well. And also, he's very up to date. These ideas are from 2013. We know that they're the very latest ideas. So, thank you, Adam. Just before you start, if anybody is walking around here, please be aware of all the wires.
Yeah, there's a wire coming from that table to this table to plug in the projector to the laptops. Hopefully that doesn't go wrong. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thanks for attending. It's good to see such a large crowd in such a small room. It's a critical mass. That's great. So, look, I'm going to be talking about transhumanism, which is really just about overcoming some of the human limitations that we have, but with a focus on science and technology, really, to do this. Okay, so let me start by asking some questions. What's the cause of the Fukushima disaster? The cause. Okay. Oh, what's the cause of climate change?
People.
What's the cause of starvation? Lack of food?
People.
Human. Look, we've got some smart people in here. So yes, as you can guess, the next slide is humans. I mean, surely there's a lot more to it than just one cause, but look, we've been sort of playing with technology, and a lot of the outcomes of the technology, the industrial technology that we use today has caused, I guess, a destabilisation in inequality. There has been some repercussions in the environment, and we could have done better, or humanity could have done better at avoiding things like the Fukushima disaster. But is it miracles? Or maybe it is miracles, okay? So who's heard of Hume, the philosopher? He spoke about miracles, and he said miracles are highly unlikely because of exceptions to previously exceptionless regularities. So that's why they're highly unlikely, because there's a regularity in physics that we understand to work. We expect no new phenomena to break these laws. But does this mean that we should never expect anything new? Okay? So look, there's been multitudes of engineering feats over the last century and beyond. We have achieved for the first time feats of engineering made possible by trial and error, aided by refined models of how the universe works, refined models of physics, refined models of how reality works, okay? But it wasn't miracles. So does an expectation of advanced technology require a belief in miracles? Because although these technologies have never existed, does it require that we believe in miracles to think that they may exist? I'd say no. But this is all about making up your own mind. But before, I'd just like to cover what I'm going to cover. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about advanced technology that's possible in this material universe. An impetus that drives us to want to advance. Evolutionary psychology, what transhumanism is, how it relates to humanism, some constant contrast to some Enlightenment thinking with some romanticism, okay? some modern criticism of high technology and ambivalence in literature towards technological growth and technological change and change in general. And then some imperatives that some transhumanists agree with, not all, to reduce suffering, reduce the likelihood of disastrous outcomes, and also enhancing our own morality. There's two main politics in transhumanism, which I'll just briefly discuss, and some main sciences that aid transhumanist goals, like biotech, nanotech, and artificial intelligence. So, well, why is this all important? There's associated risks with technology. We should try and guess, have some sort of guesstimates as to where the technology is heading. Our choices today will shape our future. This is obvious, I mean, but I think it needs emphasising because often people think the choices that can make a change is like some, medium-term financial investment, right? But we're talking about choices in how we govern society, choices in what technologies we try to pursue, and what technologies we put a moratorium on. So a lot of what I talk about will relate to the present and current technology, but when I say the future, what is conjured up in your mind? What does the future mean to you? Okay, so a few times during this presentation, to make it less boring, I'm going to try and get you guys to reflect and try and muster up some of your own previous thinking about the future, and even how you may have changed your minds in the past about the future. Okay, so look, I mentioned, look, I'm not here to convince you to my particular worldview, because my worldview keeps on changing, right? It keeps on changing, but that's a good thing, because we should all keep on changing. As soon as we have new evidence, okay, we should update our worldviews a little bit, at least. Okay? Right? I mean, if there's new evidence that comes out about how the universe works, we can't just cling on to the old and say, well, that's what I believe and that's that. Right? I think that makes sense. So this is an intro to to many parts of a large topic. I can't really do justice to everything here, and I recommend you do your own research. There's some references. I can provide you a link to this presentation if you like afterwards. So you can apply your own tools of skepticism to sort of nut out what you think is right and wrong. But I do emphasise the word think, because I think everybody needs to think deeply about where we're heading in the future. Okay, So, well, I mean, let's talk about intellectual autonomy. It's a big part of the Enlightenment. Hume's naturalistic philosophy made no appeal to God or the supernatural. I think he was an outspoken critique. He often got criticised for doing so, but he was a critique. So I won't be able to provide you with exhaustive references here, but he was great. Enablers. All right. So we're talking about Moore's Law. I kind of accidentally went to this slide before, but I assume most people here have heard of Moore's Law. Okay, so no? All right. Well, over the past few decades, we've seen unprecedented technological change. Ability to visualize impacts of technological convergences in the short, medium, long term is detrimental to our survival. We need to understand that technology roughly grows on an exponential curve. Okay? It is counterintuitive to believe that exponentials start slow and smooth and then suddenly pick up very quickly. We don't have much precedence for this sort of thing happening in one lifetime in our ancestral environment. I'll be trying to reference our ancestral environment, the environment in which our minds, or the morphology of our brains and the structure of our minds evolved, because that has a big that's a big player in how we actually think. Okay, so well, it seems like we're currently in a knee growth of a big curve at the moment. We've seen unprecedented technological feats in the last century. At some stage, things could go sigmoidal. They won't necessarily always go up forever. Technological growth in general may actually peter out. So all these things are really important to think about. Though our brains evolved to understand things in linear term, and there hasn't been much precedent for exponential technological change, we should think about it anyway. We should have that in the back of our mind when we think about the future, especially with regard to science and technology. So computers used to fit into half a building, okay? And people used to think that the way to get computers bigger and more sophisticated was actually to grow them, to make them as big as buildings. Nowadays we've got like computers like the ones we carry around in our pockets, and these aren't the smallest computers by all means, but they're pretty small compared to the ones we used to spend heaps of money trying to maintain, and that weren't all that reliable. We've got one of them in the Melbourne Museum called Cyro, and that's only about 60 years old. Or even less. So that's a pretty ancient computer by, I guess, the timeline of computers. But the oldest computers actually used to be people. Did you know that? The first computers used to be, people who used to project the movement of cannonballs through the air. And then there were secretaries who are considered computers. So Ray Kurzweil has a great track record for predicting technological change. Such an example that you can take 30 strides. If you took these 30 strides linearly, you'd only be 30 steps away. But if each stride was twice the length as the previous, you'd be 1 billion strides away, or a very long way. I forget what it is. Yeah, I think it's 1 billion, close to 1 billion, right? So you'd not be at 30, but you'd be 1 billion. And this is the power of exponential change. And this is what we've been seeing with the amount of transistors we can fit onto one CPU, roughly translating into the speed of CPUs. But there's been other things like Creighton's law for hard disk drive space, and that's been growing even faster than exponential change. So that's interesting. It's clear that technology is a key driver to our innovation. We use technology now to help scaffold our innovation. Without the tools to, I guess, see, without microscopes, without telescopes, we wouldn't be able to see what was going on in the cosmos or what was going on at the cellular level. Without atomic force microscopes, maybe we wouldn't have been able to see what was going on at the atomic level. There's been some great technologies. This is just an example of the power of exponential change. Has anybody ever seen the chessboard example? Yeah. Well, I'll just go over it quickly. Oh, maybe I shouldn't. Okay. Right. So the idea is you put 1 grain of rice on the first square, 2 grains of rice on the second, 4 on the third, because we're doubling each time. How many on the fourth? 8. 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, and so on, until you reach the end of the chessboard. I don't know how many grains of rice you need at the end of the chessboard. Maybe it's a number that could take a long time to recite. But someone else did a calculation, and if we had that much rice, it would cover the earth many times over. Okay. We'd be more than neck high in rice if we had that many grains. And we definitely wouldn't be able to fit it on the chessboard. So let's just say we wanted to have a party, and we said to each person who comes is coming to the party, bring a friend, bring 2 friends.
That's what happened.
And everybody brings 2 friends. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 conversations that people have, or 6 degrees of difference. Then we see that there's going to be too many people to fit into a house. So too many people fit into a swimming pool, and too many people to fit into a city. Okay. So we can see that this is just an example of Moore's law, Creighton's law I mentioned before. Current trends, 2020, a normal small hard disk drive will have 14 terabytes in it, and will cost about $40. That's going by today's standards. There are other new types of hard disk drives based on spindles that we may even be able to achieve better than that. Okay, and then Moore's law, by 2020, the number of transistors in a CPU should reach 32 billion. That's a lot. Okay, and then a counter is Hofstadter. He's an interesting philosopher who wrote Gödel Escher-Bach. Here's a quote from Gödel Escher-Bach, if you've ever heard of anybody. Anybody? Yep. Okay, so it always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstadter's law. So if you know anything about his book, about strange loops, it's a revealing comment. Okay, so we're living in material world, okay? And that's Madonna. Who used to listen to Madonna? Like, remember the song Material Girl? Yes, okay. So I'm not sure what she had in mind, but I'm pretty sure she wasn't really thinking about physics. But that aside, we live in a material world, yes. I'm probably not referring to what she said, but materialism is important to transhumanists because it's by observation, it's by the scientific method and observable facts about the world. Oh, facts, that's an ambiguous word. Observable phenomena that it is at least empirically adequate enough to make predictions. We can use these to build better models of the world, and thus, with better models, we can refine better technologies. We have a more clear understanding of the landscape of possibility. We can see the peaks and troughs in the landscape, and we can use our technology to bridge gaps. Which is quite different from the way natural selection does things. Natural selection is blind, okay? It doesn't make predictions, it just does. It just does what it does. It randomly mutates. And any random mutation which is adaptive, which has some usefulness in the environment, will be selected for through sexual selection, okay? So we're talking about adaptations in the ancestral environment, and this plays into the way we're made up. There was no person who engineered us to think perfectly. We're lucky that we have a frontal lobe so we can think rationally about things. If we didn't, I doubt we'd be having this conversation here today, okay? We probably wouldn't be living in rooms with built roofs and walls. We may have had weapons, but who knows? Okay, so what about mysteries in the environment? What about like stuff we just don't know about? I mean, is that intrinsically patentable? Okay, is there things about the universe which we just cannot know? Are these mysteries actual mysteries in the universe and not just mysteries in our head? So if we are ignorant about a phenomenon in the universe, then that's a fact about our state of mind, not a fact about the landscape, the real reality, the universe out there. So actually clinging to the idea that something will always be mysterious, like the human mind, for example, is like clinging to some religious belief. It's a dogma in a sense, like this is mysterious, don't go there, there be dragons, like as they say in the old maps. The mysterious parts of the world where you're not supposed to travel. So mystery is a fact of the mind. It's not a fact about the universe. So let's not reinforce our ignorance. So assuming the universe is material and can be based on inference to the best explanation, we have instruments to aid us in guiding more accurate models of the universe beyond what our five senses can achieve alone. Okay? Whether you agree with scientific realism or whether you are an anti-realist who are happy with you're just happy with empirical adequacy without any form of metaphysical commitment to a particular truth, that's fine. We can still move forward with this sort of information. Is anybody aware of this realist, anti-realist thing? I think it's a rabbit hole. If I explain it, it might take most of the night. It's important to see that mystery or ignorance of a phenomenon, like the physical phenomena required to build advanced technology, is something that should be available. I mean, if there's a physical phenomenon in the universe, then the universe goes about doing it in that way without intention. With intention, we should be able to model how the universe does it, and maybe do it even a little bit differently according to how physics allows us. Right? Yeah. So. Okay, so there's a couple of theories of mind, because intelligence is a big factor. We should consider how we think. Transhumanists are very interested in how the human mind, or how intelligence works, because one of the crowning achievements of transhumanism is either augmenting our own intelligence or advanced artificial intelligence. So, for the purpose of this talk, I'm assuming that I'm assuming that the theory of mind is compatible with either reductive physicalism or some form of materialism. I'm a patternist. I believe that everything exists really as just a pattern. Okay, if anything is patternable, then it should be modelable. And so, yeah, at the very least, panpsychism. I'm not really a panpsychist myself, although I'm interested in arguments to that effect. So keep an open mind, especially in regards to consciousness and whether we can create artificial intelligence that experience some form of phenomenal experience, has some sort of aboutness to its model of the world, instead of just a series of like lines of code that are just like executing a series of instructions without any form of intentionality. So the basic assertion is that we are governed by the laws of physics. Therefore, intelligence, which exists in the physical universe, is a physical phenomena. Therefore, understanding human intelligence is a problem of understanding the physical properties of intelligence. Therefore, inasmuch as we are smart enough, we can understand the physical properties of intelligence. Therefore, if we are smart enough to understand the physical properties of intelligence, we can understand the mechanism and patterns of intelligence. Therefore, if we can understand this, we should be able to build an intelligence or engineer an intelligence.
What's intelligence?
I define intelligence as just simply the ability to solve complex problems in complex environments given limited resources. You don't even need to say complex. Intelligence could be, like, there's many forms, okay? There's the human intelligence, which is cross-domain optimization plus a whole heap of like humanness, right? But intelligence is really just an optimization factor, yeah. And which has, well, some would say would have a model of the self, which is actually included in as in part of the universe, because we don't exist outside the universe, and neither does our intelligence or our consciousness. It's not like in a separate magisterium. Our consciousness is a phenomena in the universe and of the universe. If that makes sense. I hope so. Okay. So yeah, assuming physics. A theory of mind, I've spoken about that. Okay. So some people talk about the hard problem of consciousness, the explanatory gap between how the mind works and how the phenomenal experience one has of consciousness. And I've spoken about reductive physicalism. We're talking about impetus now. Now, why do we want to change? What is it? We have an urge to go beyond our limitations. We have for a very long time. This is perhaps what lifted us out of our ancestral environment. Just having a big brain and being able to, solve problems within our own natural environment, given our claws or our teeth, isn't enough. We built tools, we built language, we built stories, and we developed early technologies and then developed other technologies scaffolded on these technologies, and so on and so on. And here we are standing in a room full of people powered by electricity, And we probably found about this event on the internet. So here's some lovely pictures of ancient stone tools, some examples of pre-agrarian technologies. So yes, I'd like to say impetus, but I don't mean the sum of our instincts. So I think there's something about our frontal lobe which makes us reason about things beyond just our instinctual reactions, our knee-jerk reactions to situations, okay, that contributes to our impetus or our goal setting, our will, our want of change. Okay, so what is it that excites you about the future? What is interesting about the future? What gets you about the future? What do you hope for about the future? It's time to reflect.
Is this when I get my jetpack and the 3D printer?
Well, you can get your 3D printer, you can get your jetpack from New Zealand, but be careful, they're very hard to park. And you don't want to stall while you're in mid-flight either.
And it's still out of my price, right?
It'd be a really good way to cull the population if everybody had a jetpack. Yeah, so I think it's a common question. But now, what frightens you? What are you scared of? People.
Tony Abbott.
Tony Abbott.
I think what I'm frightened of is a reference you made earlier, which was probably we would have developed weapons even if nothing else had happened. And I'm wondering, how your people view the use of technology into more powerful, terrifying weapons. Because
Yeah, that's a big question. And look, I don't want to give the impression that transhumanists are Pollyannaists and are really just interested in march forward at any cost. Yes, of course. Some of the early transhumanists went on to found some of the leading world research institutions on existence risk, or basically making sure we don't go extinct. There's one at Oxford, the Future of Humanity Institute. There's at Cambridge. I'll be talking about this later.
Well, there is an organisation called Human Extinction Society who advocate human extinction.
Yeah.
So, that's not sort of.
That's not. I don't think that might be an interesting topic, but I don't think they're transhumanist. In fact, there's a novel brought out by Dan Brown that kind of talks about wiping out a lot of the population. Has anybody ever read Inferno? Dan Brown, the writer of the Da Vinci Code, yeah? So that was a big introduction to transhumanism for a lot of people. So transhumanism was the main sort of premise behind the whole book. That was a major factor in the plot device there. Where am I? Okay, so I'm from an organisation called Humanity Plus. But has anybody ever heard of transhumanism before this meeting? Yeah, just not many. A few people.
I'm not sure whether it's by that name or not.
Yeah, that's
about
the
40
thing.
years ago called When Man Becomes Machine. I can't remember the author of it.
Yeah, there are popular science fiction books which used advancing technology as a plot device, but that's an interesting premise to look at, especially it's hard science fiction. It's not the same as actually looking at the real world and seeing what's possible, but some would claim that transhumanists aren't actually looking at the real world.
Why do you overcome aging? Are you going to overcome reproduction as well, or are we just going to explode the population?
Well, that's with any technology, I think there's always a give and take. There's never been any trade-offs. There's always been a trade-off with introduction of new technology. The idea is to make the trade-off worth it. Okay, let's just say we do overcome aging, but that's not the only technology which develops. We also get the technology to derive energy and consumables from minimal amounts of matter. Okay. Or we also get the ability to go into space or go orbital, right? It's very hard to imagine we'll get one technology and one technology alone in the future, and that's it, right? And we'll have to like deal with all the same problems that we have today. It's like saying, okay, well, all of a sudden we'll get like people living for like 1,000 years, but it takes 1,000 years to get to 1,000-year-old, right? And it means that there's going to be other technological advances which we hope will help mitigate the human footprint on the global environment here, but also help us move into space and help, I guess, a more evenly distributed distribution of technologies, of enhancement technologies. So transhumanist declaration. Look, there's a few key factors here. It's profoundly affected by science and technology in the future. Not the transhumanist declaration. We are profoundly affected by science and technology. So there's a broadening of human potential. Here's some key things that we want to do: overcoming aging, cognitive shortcomings, involuntary suffering. I mean, that's a big thing, but most, if you've ever like gone through a normal life, have like just accepted that suffering is part of life, and maybe we think because we've experienced that it should be. And our confinement's kind of deaf. So there's a potential for a whole slew of technologies to be realised that perhaps we don't understand or can't predict, which is both good and bad. So we are in the face of serious risks. New technology gives us more and more power. It amplifies power. It even amplifies more power in the individual hands. So we need to be careful. Although progress is change, not all change is progress. I think that makes sense to highlight that, because look, we may be able to develop new technologies, or there may be a change of government that takes us back, that puts a moratorium on technologies and makes us drive around horse and cart again. And so this could have a detrimental effect. So not all technology is good technology. Not all change is good change. So we want to reduce risk. Existential risk is not just a risk to existentialists, it's existence risk. It's the risk of like a large majority of human beings being alive, or perhaps complete extinction, which could be unfortunate. So we're concerned with policy making guided by responsible and inclusive moral vision. And we're interested in the well-being, not just of humans, okay, but any life form that has some form of sentience, some form of like experience, some form of like qualia, if you like. This animal or this life form, whether it be artificial or biological or a cross between in the future, should be considered. Their state of mind or their subjective experience should be considered when we're making new technologies, or when we're planning which societal direction we're going to take. Okay? So we hope with technologies we can dramatically reduce the suffering in the world. Okay. I know it sounds like ridiculous to a lot of people here, but it's something that a lot of transhumanists are very passionate about, and it is a subject of much debate. That's true.
Can I just ask, is we refer to say the ultimate transhumanist aspiration is to have human-like consciousness in a non-biological substrate?
Well, I guess more to the point, consciousness or sentience in a non-biological substrate is useful, even if we were to survive on a different substrate, or if we could transform our bodies into a more durable substrate, then that's useful, because then we can survive a lot of the extinction risks that I've been sort of alluding to. We can overcome a lot of the biological shortcomings that we currently have as a result of just blind natural selection. But yeah, sure. But I don't know if modelling just a human-like sentience on a non-biological substrate is the end goal, I think it would be useful for like seeing what could be done.
Is there an end goal then?
Sorry?
Is there an end goal? Is there
It's, I guess the thing is, I think a general end goal, it's not like, we should all live on Mars. I think making predictive assessments about the future requires a submission to the fact that we just don't know everything, and so we can't take everything into account. So we need to update our goals, not just our beliefs, but our goals based on new evidence, right? And so we're not always going to be, like our goals may change once we're 100 times more smarter. And in fact, I think they will.
Who can afford this transhumanism life?
Huh?
Who can afford to supply all this technological advance?
Who can afford to supply the technology that you're wearing? Have you got a phone in your pocket?
Yeah.
Did you wake up like between four walls in a bed, not underneath a tree? You're wearing glasses. That's actually an enhancement.
Yeah.
Have you got feelings? People
that can't afford that.
Yeah, and so there is, and so I think it's fair to say that this sort of technology isn't affordable by the whole world, but the bell curve is widening, and there are initiatives out there to get this form of technology out there to everybody. And I don't think technology, scientific growth and technological growth just generally makes things expensive. It can make things cheaper, right? It can make things drastically cheaper. And so if we had very cheap access to energy, a distributed access, such as with photovoltaics, solar energy, having nanotechnology to get to harvest energy from the sun in a much more efficient way, then we should just be able to distribute energy much more easily and affordably without actually grids that can break or can be hacked or yep.
You've been talking a lot about natural selection.
I did before a little bit.
I think that's old hat, isn't it?
What natural selection?
People are studying genetic makeups and actually getting rid of genes.
Yeah.
That's not natural selection. That's actually selection by direction.
So, as far as I understand, what you're saying is when we have children, we choose the mate that we're having children with, for instance, or we haven't got. In a few cases, we've actually chosen the genes of our children. There's some children out there now with 3 parents.
Yeah, and some kids who come along with genes which are not good genes. There's science is trying to change those genes to overcome the problem.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, that's not natural selection, is it?
No. No, I agree.
Just going back to what you were saying before about sentience on a non-biological substrate. Is that the same as saying sentience within running software?
No, it's not the same. You see, running software as far as we see it today, I think there are 2 metaphors there that we're talking about that needs to be cleared up. So when you say running software, do you mean something like Microsoft Windows or Office?
No. I mean a self-regulating, self-administering software system. You said before you considered that the human brain could be modelled.
Yeah, sure.
Could be known. Yeah. If that is the case, if it can be known and modelled, is it reasonable that the model would be a software model? And if the human brain is sentient and the model is accurate, therefore the software is sentient when it's running.
Sure, that's just like saying the human mind is software. Right.
Well, how do you feel about that statement?
Sure. I mean, it's a good metaphor. If we're not really trying to simplify the human mind or sentience down to something as simple as the common forms of software that we see today.
No, I don't think you'd get it in a Windows box, but...
Can I just ask what's wrong with death?
That's a good question.
Because the idea of having little bottles, or depending on which sci-fi you've read,
Yeah.
with these sentient forms in them
Yep.
doing whatever,
Yeah.
is terrifying. What do you say?
So, what's the use of sentience in a bottle? Well, I think there's useful. It's used for the sentience in question for it to have a good experience. I assume that if we develop a way to extend lifespan, we're not going to develop a way to extend suffering as a byproduct. It's going to be a healthy version of a person that extends. It's going to be more of like a rejuvenative human being. Like the things that go wrong with us don't just get worse and worse, but we never die. It's more that we maintain, a healthy regulation of bodily functions, I'd say. And I can't imagine why we'd want to maintain a life or see value in maintaining a life for long periods of time that is on average having a bad time. So in a sense, death is useful if there's only suffering ahead, right? If you could say that there's a very high degree of probability of the world getting better, or like one's experience getting better, then to my value, I'd think that it'd be worth staying alive if you had that choice. Currently we don't, okay?
The question is,
Yep,
just to go back a few sentences,
yep.
that if you just saw suffering ahead,
Mm.
then a choice to terminate that suffering may come within the transhumanist. So what is your take on euthanasia?
I don't have any rule-based systems about like when to turn the switch off or when to I think people should be given their own choice, right? If they want to end their life because their future selves is going to be on balance suffering, it's just going to be an experience of suffering, or if they have some form of existential reason why they don't want to live anymore, that's fine. That's up to them. If they're making an informed decision, then I think that's reasonable to say that people should be able to make their own choices in the matter, right? I don't think we should force immortality on people. And I don't like the word immortal. I don't think that there's any reason why we can expect to live forever. Okay, so I'm going to skip through a few slides because I'm behind. Okay, here's the question. Here's another probe. A lot of our memories about what the future we can expect is really based on our experience with stories we've heard about the future. Okay? So who's seen Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger, based on a Philip K. Dick novel? We Can Remember Your Dreams for Free. A recent version came out as well, like a new updated version, like at the movies. It was all right. But look, we need to know. Like, here's an interesting quote. Like, one would expect that people remember the past and imagine the future, but he's saying that it's the opposite. That we actually imagine the past and remember the future. So, what's our conception of the future based on? Is it science fiction novels we read as a kid, or is it some science fiction story that we saw on TV, some movies, or some sort of popular opinion? Remember that all these stories were based on plot devices that were, trying to compete for airtime on televisions and on movie screens. So they weren't necessarily the best definitions of reality.
Actually, it's watching a 4-year-old play on the computer.
Yeah.
You can't get your head around that because you have no idea what the next 10 years are going to bring with the generation coming through now.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It's happening too fast, you can't. I can't think
It's
of
very
the future.
difficult to make these predictions.
Because
Yeah.
the past is now so, the past is changing so quickly in the current nowness of life.
Mm.
To try and imagine everything in another 10 years is actually impossible to do.
Mm.
Laptops considered obsolete within a year of it being issued.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? How do you square that remark off with the fact that Einstein said it's all happened at once? And it matters on how you move, it's how you look.
I'm not a physicist. I don't know. Like my experience, I don't know what Einstein said, but he said if everything happened at once, then in this universe he'd saying there would be no time. I can't explain time to you, and neither can most physicists. Actually, it's a really difficult issue when you get down to it. Look, okay, but like the fact is that we experience the universe as though it's going through time. I can't really tell you that he's wrong.
But he's never been proved wrong as far as...
Yes, he has.
No, he hasn't.
Oh, yes, he has. Yeah, anyway, I've got to move on.
The thing is gravity waves, we've just discovered those.
Yeah.
That's very recent. You don't want to go down this path, okay?
No, I don't. Because I'm not a physicist. I mean,
No, I
if you want me to
didn't-
talk
I-
out of my hat, then I'll just say anything.
I didn't want to.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. But I'm not trying to tell you how things are.
I understand.
But I'm just trying to give you food for thought.
That's cool.
Okay, so look, there's some Enlightenment figures that I'd like to cover as well. So the father of humanism, anybody heard of Giovanni Maradona or Mirandola? Yeah, so he was like one of the first people to really promote this humanistic idea. So transhumanist has its roots in humanism, and although I haven't got time to read the quote, I think I've only got like 15 minutes left. Okay, so Immanuel Kant was another big influence on transhumanism. So it's about leaving our self-centered immaturity. Immaturity is the incapacity to use one's intelligence without the guidance of another. So it's saying think for yourself and try and reason how the universe works. Although there's so much information out there, it's unreasonable for one person to have all the details to have a perfect opinion on everything. So we have to really depend on each other to an extent as well. Yeah, Rousseau. Okay, well, Rousseau is interesting because he was a romanticist. He spoke about some of the bad things about change and societal reform. He spoke about some of the bad things about technology. A couple of quotes. He said, while the government and its laws see to the safety and well-being of men assembled, the scientists, letters and arts, less despotic and perhaps even more powerful, spread garlands of flowers over the iron chains to which they are laden. Throttle in them the sentiment that original freedom for which they seemed born, make them love their slavery, and fashion them into what is called civilized peoples. Okay, so he's saying that the alternative here, in his writing, he says, the alternative and the desirable one is to go back to living how we used to, before we stumbled on technology. He has a romanticized version of nature. He thinks that would make us more happy. That's debatable. A lot of the reasons why we survived in nature was because we were pushed to the brink. Often we were constantly starving and surviving on a few kilojoules every day to make us through to the next day and find the next water hole or find the next fruit tree, find the next zebra. So it wasn't exactly, a Bambi-style Garden of Eden like our ancestral environment. It was savage. I like the idea of, running into the forest and sort of giving up everything I've all these commitments, all these physical things that tie me down like a ball and chain. I could just give it up all and then just go run into into nature and just burn everything, burn all my belongings, and then I'd escape all these things, these commitments, all these physical belongings, and this commitment to this lifestyle in the modern world. But then I'd probably quickly find as night approached, I'd probably be watched by hungry predators, and I'd be sort of staving off flesh-eating insects and trying to brush away territorial spiders and things.
Probably
It's not.
Be arrested by the park rangers.
Yeah, but yeah, that's true. And then I'd find myself in back into civilization again. Yeah, never mind.
Washing in cold water.
Yeah. I don't mind a bit of cold water, but yeah. I mean, the idealised, romanticised version of nature that often we appeal to isn't actually reality of what it's really like to live in nature. It's quite scary. I've done a lot of camping and I've got a lot of insect bites. I like camping every now and again. It's good to go back, but in measure, I don't think I could live there. So we've had some modern criticism based on Leon Kass, for instance, is a bio-Luddite who speaks about the wisdom of repugnance. If we find disgust in something, that it should be wrong, okay? He thought that people licking ice creams in public was disgusting. So therefore we shouldn't do that. No ice creams in public, thank you very much. Okay, so this yuck factor, this heuristics of fear, that really just comes back to a biological system that is sometimes useful in the ancestral environment to make sure we didn't get poisoned or whatnot, we didn't eat the wrong fruit or we didn't eat rotten meat, was probably useful for our ancestors and our ancestors' ancestors who didn't really think a lot about what they were doing, just acting on instinct a lot of the time. So this yuck factor is an evolutionary mechanism that keeps us safe in an ancestral environment. So, but we shouldn't really use this yuck factor as a be-all and end-all of moral guidance, not at all. So some technologies may elicit a yuck factor. Has anybody here been into surgery? Recently, anybody had an invasive surgical procedure, like a bypass? Yeah, something like that. Now, thinking about it, who'd want to have their chest ripped open and have some other people go in there with tools and mess around with stuff and have springs put in our veins to make sure they keep open? It's not a nice thing to think about, but when you look at the alternative is that you have a heart attack or something goes wrong, seriously wrong, a lot of people opt to take the surgery, right? But the surgery is getting a lot less painful. We didn't always have sedatives and anaesthetics to keep us sort of unconscious or make us not feel pain.
One of the things he's talking about there is gender reassignment.
Yep.
Well, I find it repugnant that he should find that repugnant.
Do you think that's a worthy response?
I think gender reassignment is something that should be within the ambit of a person's personal choice.
Personally, I agree with you.
And if somebody feels repugnant feelings because of that, it's because my feeling is they have got deep-rooted insecurities and can't face change.
Wait a second. Insecurities come from value-based systems of how we interpret the world should work, okay?
That's right.
And it's very tribal. Now, there's many cultures with different value systems that try and tell everybody, our culture is the best because, this is obviously how the world should work. And, there's so many wars that go over these subtle differences in, morals or ethics that fall out of these virtue-based, rule-based moral systems. And so how do you then, tell somebody from one tribe who's grown up and developed this value system A to be friends with another tribe who came up with, grew up with a completely different set of values? What person A finds disgusting, person B finds okay, and and vice versa. And how do you point at them and say, okay, well, no, you shouldn't be disgusted at this. Here is a set of things you can be disgusted at, but everything else you shouldn't. So I'd say, look, forget about disgust. It's not a really worthy to my opinion, actually, that's me preaching, it's not really a worthy tool for trying to govern like what's right and wrong. I think we should be taking maybe a more sort of systems utilitarian, I'm a bit of a utilitarist, approach to working out what the right thing to value is, and it's a learning thing. It's yeah.
Does it mean we need a bigger frontal lobe?
It'd be nice. I mean, if we did have a bigger frontal lobe, part of what makes us moral is our ability, more moral than like perhaps, you know, an animal that can't think the way we do, is our frontal lobe. It's not our instinct. It's not just our instinct, it's our frontal lobe. It's our ability to reason. Now, we have a feeling of empathy and feelings of love, but on the other hand, love can mean like an inclusive sort of arrangement between two people or a small group at the exclusion of people outside the group. And so people who are committed to a certain circle will cold shoulder people from outside the circle. And this is a symptom of like inclusive empathy. I don't think we have a biological correlate to exclusive. So exclusive empathy, like an empathy that is empathy for everybody in the world. I mean, it's more of an abstract.
That's why we need a big brain, so that we can.
Well, I'm agreeing with you, but
Nobody wants to give birth to bigger frontal lobe.
that's true. That's a really good point. And the fact is,
mean that it will only be a frontal lobe that is born. And the computer
I think there's
will provide the body.
maybe, but I think that's just a biological limitation. It's interesting that in the past, there's been a lot of women dying and children dying in the process of birth, childbirth. But even though there was at some stages 40% of children and women dying as a process of giving birth, still for some reason the frontal lobe was selected for. Bigger brains was still selected for, despite the fact that it would kill a lot of the offspring. And remember, the offspring takes 9 months in the womb to gestate and mature before it gets born. It's not a trivial thing. So it's interesting that evolution stumbled on intelligence like ours and unintelligently just selected for it, which is quite interesting. So look, ambivalence in literature. So we've heard of Prometheus who stole fire from the gods. Prometheus is an interesting character. So he stole fire from the gods. And so Prometheus suffers, but mankind ended up getting fire. So it's not really an exact analogy. It's like scientists don't necessarily suffer a lot in the process of developing new technologies and bringing electricity or fresh water to people. But lesson learned is playing with powerful forces can cause powerful adverse outcomes. This is an abstract lesson. In our case, harnessing powerful physics with the aid of technology, we should be careful, basically. Okay. Flight of Icarus, anybody heard of that one? Right? Somebody wearing some wings made of wax and feathers flies towards the sun, gets so close to the sun that they melt, and he falls to his death. So unfortunately, he wasn't using the right materials. So there's a lesson learned: build safe technology and don't alpha test on people. Know your materials and substrates, right? And basically know what you're building. And I mentioned Dan Brown. The main extremist, Zorbist, is actually a member of Humanity Plus. And I'm on the board of the organisation called Humanity Plus in the real world, which is quite different from the portrayal in the book. And he points out that, this book really points out, as in many movements there exists a small but militant fraction that believe that the movement is not moving fast enough and that there are apocalyptic thinkers who believe that the end is coming and that someone needs to take drastic action to save the future of the species. And so, look, there probably are like a few militant transhumanists out there who take things to the extreme, and want to impose technologies, want to like a rapid sort of technological growth. Maybe they want to live forever or something, and want to do anything in order to get there, and that may cause issues. So, the book was more about population control, and so Zorbas thought that he'd release some form of like gene, some disease that would somatically change people's genes, and it would kill off 2/3 of the population, but the 1/3 of the population that it did in fact that survived would become better humans, and that was his idea. Anyway, controversial. Well, let's talk about like real world things that people find controversial. So there's some imperatives that transhumanists like to call imperatives, or some aims of transhumanism, and one of them is reducing suffering, not just through like adapting social systems or changing like the environment, like a wall and clothes and healthcare, but actually changing the human so as to be less susceptible to depression or less susceptible to unnecessary pain and things like that. So David Pearce came and spoke at a conference last year, the Science, Technology in the Future conference. I've got a heap of interviews with this guy online, video interviews, if you're interested to find out more. So he's talking about smart drugs to also morally enhance people. So if we can make people more intelligent, plus guide their morality, then we can likely have a society not just through a rule-based system imposed on people, but for actual, the human being itself. We may be able to have a more ethical population.
Want to guide their morality? Who takes it upon themselves to be the guide?
Yeah, that's a problem. I don't know. I think the people who know the most about.
Why should anyone?
Well, because it takes. Well, if we're saying that nobody should, and that like morality should always be some form of random, spontaneous order, then that's what we had before civilization. Okay, and even in fact in some parts of civilization, I'd say. Now, if you compared the outcome of a random sample of some moral system to one which we could intelligently guide, then you'd need to make the distinction between the two. I'm not going to tell you which one's better, but I know which one I'd rather. Okay?
There's a lot of meaning in that we intelligently guide.
Yeah, okay. So that, I'm just trying to convey some ideas to you in a sense that's couched in English. There's probably a better, it's probably a better way of describing it. So when I talk about we, I don't mean me and a group of elites sitting in some ivory tower that's not regulated at all. There are people like Peter Singer, who I look up to, and ethicists out there who have studied, done a lot of study into what morality is and what's ethical. I'd give them a lot more attention than I would somebody who just spontaneously came up with a theory themselves without really thinking and studying about these sorts of things.
Well, I just jump in and say to you, you being a computer person, that the whole internet is distributed. There's no intelligence running it. It has organised itself virtually, and we've helped it along. But I think that's the same as we can do ordinarily amongst us all overall, without having anyone in charge of anything.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're talking about differences in social systems to determine, there's a couple of ones. There's one where you have, there's gradients in between these, but there's more socialised system where you have checks and balances on actions, at making sure that, person X doesn't blow up or cause some form of disease in his backyard lab that wipes out half the population or something like that, or some mad psychopath doesn't affect the lifestyle of a million others. So there's some form of regulatory thing, and then there's the idea that things spontaneously emerge, and then just see what happens.
Well, that's done in England by the Rowden, actually.
Maybe, yeah. So David Pearce he's been working on a project, the hedonistic imperative. It's more philosophy around where we should focus our attention on technologies, and he thinks the most ethical thing to do is to reduce suffering. So he's saying that we should focus on technologies, like for instance in vitro meat, so that we don't need to rely on factory farming animals in order to feed such a large population of people. We don't need to, if we can develop food and resources in such a way that we don't need to enslave animals in order to do them, put them in the factory process, then we're not relying on the suffering of cows or chickens or whatnot in order to get food on our plates. So I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but Bill Gates is throwing a heap of money at research and development into in vitro meat. Not only may it reduce suffering, but it may actually increase the efficiency of food production. Okay, and also have less of an imprint into the environment, a footprint. So, but why do we want to mitigate pain? What's the use? Actually, I saw this conversation on the forum. I thought I might just put it up here. Because it's painful. I mean, who likes pain for the sake of pain? Yeah, but then is it really suffering? Right? Is it really pain? If somebody wants to get spanked, okay, and they like it, then that's their form of bliss. But pain is useful. Why is it useful? It's useful for keeping us out of danger. It's we've adapted pain so that we don't put our hand in next to sharp objects. We don't stand in fires. We don't put our head in an alligator's mouth or whatnot. Yes, but for survival else it's pretty useless. So we live in a different world than we used to in our ancestral environment. So the way that we survive doesn't require the same pain registers in order for us to function in this world. But pain is a warning sign of danger. Unfortunately I can't get rid of this. If technology could be used to provide a method that's just effective, or even more so, without the suffering, then power to it.
You mightn't take any notice.
Well, if we have the technology that's a functional analogue of pain without us feeling the experience of pain, then yes. I could just focus on just this one small part of transhumanism, but I think there's a whole lot more. Moral enhancement, I mentioned that before. Julian Savulescu, who is an Australian actually, has been writing quite a bit about this idea. It's controversial. But if we can morally enhance ourselves as individuals, then we may be able to make better decisions on how to move into the future. Are we ethically fit for the future? Are we moral enough to sort of wield the power we do of technology that we have now? Right? Okay.
Probably some are and some aren't, but one of the problems we have in democracy is that most of our leaders are there because they're psychopaths or sociopaths.
This has always been the problem, though. When we only had swords, we weren't moral enough to control ourselves with those.
Yeah. So I mean, who says how are we going to stay moral
we're
if
still
we
here,
have?
but the technology's advanced. So
Pink is arguing for role.
That's true. So look, we have biomedical and technological means of moral enhancement today. Some people are a lot more moral after they take certain attention drugs. who may have some form of ADHD or maybe suffering from some form of schizophrenia, they act more morally in society if they're medicated on balance. Okay, there are some side effects, and that's one of the things that I hope with technology we can overcome. But what about traditional moral enhancers like moral education and social reform? Is that enough? I mean, I'd say that these are very useful, but to say that these are useful isn't enough to exclude moral enhancement. Okay, I think that it's worth focusing on moral enhancement as one of the pathways to make us more moral, as well as trying to refine social systems and have moral education. By the way, I think there's a course in Coursera called Practical Ethics by Peter Singer. He's giving it, it's free, and you can just log in and do it. And the first assignment's due in about like maybe half a week, so you can actually still join and do the assignment if you can quickly read the material. It's good.
Actually define moral enhancement.
How do you define moral enhancement? Well, I could talk about what's moral, but I don't want to talk about rules about what makes something moral and what is moral, what isn't moral. Something that just allows us to think clearly about the factors involved in making a decision. We're very bad at numbers. We don't calculate very well in our head. We're more interested in one person who's got a problem right next to us than a million people starving overseas who we can't see with our own eyes. Okay, so if morality is defined as just only helping people who are physically next to you, like the Good Samaritan walking down looking down the road and helping some injured person, then okay. But if morality actually means helping anybody in the world who needs it, regardless of your physical proximity, then that needs to be taken into account as well. Clearly, it's a cognitive strain to take into account every living person, or to work the numbers as to determine which charity is the most effective. But if we were better at churning numbers in our head, if we were more intelligent, then we'd be able to think through these issues a lot more clearly in general. Hope that answers, gives you some explanation.
Seems to me that all of that has a basis on what you said a bit earlier.
Yeah.
Different tribes have different value scales.
Mm.
There was a tribe not so long ago that believed that they sent conquistadors around the world to convert everybody to a particular religious way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there was another group that believed, no, we believe in something else and we want to eat other human beings.
Mm.
So it's very difficult, I think, to just taking on from where you are.
Yeah.
To leave it to human beings. I think machines are better.
I'm on your side. Who wants to vote an AI government? Well, it depends on the AI. There's reason to believe that AI may not actually favour us if it has cross-purpose goals to our own. But that's a whole nother discussion. If I'm to go through the material which I intended, which I'm not going to finish anyway, but I just don't think I could do it. Anyway, so yep.
You talk about morals.
Yeah.
I don't think you can define morals, apart from saying this particular group might have a certain set of morals. Another set might have another set.
Okay.
Right, you take Syria,
Which is
something like 2 million refugees. I suppose one side thinks they're right, the other side thinks they're wrong. So there's no absolute moral.
So you're a moral relativist.
No, I got my own morals.
Okay.
But they could be different from yours.
Sure.
Or everybody else in this room.
Yeah.
But there's no absolute moral.
Okay.
But what if what's the stuff you put in the water to help your teeth? Fluoride. What if you had a drug that you could put in the water like fluoride that just made everybody very benevolent? It wouldn't matter about what specific rules there are, just everybody felt empathetic towards other people and benevolent towards them. Is there a good reason for not doing that?
Because somebody's putting the drug into the water. They can put something else in the water.
The good reason there is if everybody felt benevolent towards everybody else, progress would stop. Progress depends on competitiveness.
I don't know that like competitiveness depends on nastiness. And I know some examples where that's one way of achieving progress, but it's like saying that only the most immoral places in the world achieve progress. And I just can't really agree with that. Yeah. Well, taken to the extreme.
If there is somebody, if we have equanimity towards all, but if somebody then is evil or has an ambition, and you don't curb him, you're not doing you're killing the stepladder effect. You're killing the scaffolding effect if you're equal everywhere.
I still don't see how evil equals the wanting the impetus to progress.
Because somebody evil will propagate somebody good.
I just don't see the logic.
You have to have a minus and a plus.
Well,
Don't have a minus and a plus. Yeah, well, that's my choice.
Okay, all right. Can I move on? So existential risks. What are they about? Like we don't want to. I think a lot of people would be adverse to like an extinction event. So there's some organisations that primarily came from the transhumanist crowd that organise these. So the Future of Humanity Institute, founded by the co-founder of Humanity Plus, Nick Bostrom. This Centre for Existential Risks, funded by a lot of the community within the artificial intelligence explosion, singularity crowd, and transhumanism as well. Okay, so the politics of transhumanism, I went over that. So we've got democratic transhumanism one hand, and then libertarian transhumanism on the other. There's actually a lot of overlap between these people and how they think about how society should operate. It's definitely worth having a look at this link. If I had time, I'd go there, but unfortunately I don't. What time is it? I think I've gone over time. Yeah, okay. So, I'm just going to flick through the rest of the slides. We know that Craig Venter was credited for creating life in the lab, right? He inserted a synthetic genome that was based on the pattern of an existing genome into a cell shell, and it booted up and was alive, according to our definition of life. Okay, so are we playing God is what some people think we're doing, but I don't know, it's just one of those things. Hacking the genetic code is playing God, then God should have created a more secure password. That's like saying the biology is not complex enough for us humans to not being able to comprehend. It's a bit cheeky. So Freeman Dyson said that a new generation of artists would write genomes as fluently as Blake and Byron wrote verses. Famous economist. Biotech. In Melbourne, we're in the hub of biotech in the Southern Hemisphere. I think we have the biggest critical mass of biotech firms in the whole Southern Hemisphere of the world. So that's something to be proud of. Peter Doherty came and spoke at the conference last year. He was awesome. I got an interview with him that I haven't edited yet.
Came and spoke here last year.
Yeah, he's really good. Pandemics. So this is one thing that we need to be aware of. Peter Doherty speaks about this. We hope that with modern technology and technological advancements, we can either develop vaccines to help us mitigate against this, or augment ourselves to be less prone to pandemics. Maybe a bit of both. So biotechnology has got a lot of directions. Some of you may have seen the spider goat article out there. They mix the genome of the spider and a goat, and it doesn't actually look like a spider and a goat mixed together. But the goat does have milk that has fibres in it, like a spider web fiber, and they're using that for bulletproof vests. It's very strong. It's very hard to milk spiders. They've tried, but they're too aggressive and they're too small. Right. So nanotechnology. Anybody heard of nanotechnology?
Yes.
So if we can really get we already are doing amazing things with nanotechnology. We have nanotechnology in our pockets. This has got most electronics have got nanotechnology in it. It's got a lot of applications today. In the future, the far future, we may be able to create things like atomically precise manufacturing, making materials so hard that we can, that it may be like 30 times stronger than steel, right? So graphene is an interesting one. With one sheet of graphene fibre, which is basically graphite, carbon, if we can develop that cheaply enough, we already can develop it, it's an expensive process. If we can have economies of scale and we can ramp up production, then it'll get really cheap. If we can do that, then a lot of these devices will be a lot lighter and a lot stronger and maybe even more flexible. Very flexible, and so maybe a replacement for materials like that we build cars with, like metal and things. We may even be able to have the substance strong enough to winch probes into space instead of launching rockets into space using chemical fuels, which are quite expensive.
We already have MIMS, which will go into your arm and early warnings of cancer.
Yeah.
Which is available in Australia.
Yeah.
Everyone should have one.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was talking about. This whole access to technology, if it's mitigated by the market, like the socialists would say, then only the rich can have access to these sorts of things. And so if you can afford the technology, then you get it. I think that's been useful so far, and at least it drives progress.
Can I just say, micro electromechanical system.
Yeah.
Other than the little chips you can plug it in, and the different ones for cancer, they can check that. And before you even contract the main disease, you know that you've got it or not
Come back to the previous one.
Another application to nanotechnology is photovoltaics. Another conference speaker last year was Scott Watkins. I interviewed him too, and he's been able to develop photovoltaics that's both flexible and printable, really darn cheap. They can print 10 meters or a meter a second, right? Which silicon-based wafers that we put on our roofs today, they're very expensive to make. The setup cost of a factory is millions. The setup cost of this printing device that he's got is $250,000, and it's only beginning. So there's a lot of headroom with this technology.
We're going to move on regardless of the government.
Sorry?
We're going to move on regardless of the government.
Well, yeah. Well, CSIRO is funded by the government. Yeah, just to let you know. Nanotechnology, so atomically precise manufacturing in the long term is a pretty exciting thing. We could have molecular assemblers that could roam around and turn things like sand into substrate, sand into bricks, or sand into electronics, or maybe even sand into food. Okay, so longevity. So which is more fun? So people often think of it as a pill to enlarge your immortality. Immortality is I think a poetic word to describe long life. I don't think it's mathematically possible for people to live for eternity. Can you stand at the end of eternity and then say, "Hey, I've lived for immortality"? No, you can't. You can't. And for people who were born earlier than you, they've had a longer immortality than you if you end up living for a long time. So it's a bit of a ridiculous concept. But longevity isn't. It's there's a lot of moonshots for longevity now. A lot of research. Google have turned around and started funding this sort of thing. They've got their own organisation called Calico. I'll just skip through some of that. So modern projects. Calico. Can Google solve death? This was last year that they started this. We've got the Regenerative Medicine Institute at Monash University in Australia as well, right? So breakthrough prizes in science, focusing on research in curing disease and aging. These guys are funding it. So that's Yuri Milner, a famous Russian billionaire, Sergey Brin, Mark Zuckerberg. So Orby de Grey has got the Sense Foundation. He's been researching a more like a more repair mechanism approach to rejuvenative approach to anti-aging. So when I say anti-aging, it's just about keeping people healthy at a certain level of health. It doesn't matter how old you are, a certain level of health, such that you're maintaining that sort of level. Yeah. So yeah, you can like get run over by a truck and you'll die healthy. You'll still get run over by a truck; they'll still kill you, right? Okay. So, but recently, like we had Craig Venter like before in the slides. He's heading up a new institute called the Human Longevity Institute. This guy is very famous. He's very well known for his science, and he's probably one of the most well-known scientists in the world right now for doing what he did with creating life in the lab. He's now doing this longevity stuff. So it's not like just pie in the sky anymore. I think serious scientists are thinking about these problems.
Need to wind up.
Okay, well, I think I might just skip artificial intelligence because it's a rabbit hole that could take a long time. But I'll just say that AI could be really good or it could be bad depending on how we develop it. Okay, is that good enough? So yeah, there's plenty of examples of AI. So neuroscience, there's a couple of approaches. There's the neuroscience approach, understanding how we think and our model of intelligence, to try and build AI model of that, or to actually take a methodological mathematical approach which may or may not draw from neuroscience as an inspiration. So there's plenty of modern projects and we're getting closer to achieving this. The idea of a technological singularity or an intelligence explosion is really beginning to hit mainstream. But I think if there's one take-home for artificial intelligence is once it gets to a certain point into it, like if it's configured correctly, it can then understand its own operation, if it can, and if it can make changes to its own source code, it can then optimize its own programming, okay, and then become smarter by doing that. Also, it could federate more resources to be able to compute on. So it's not limited to this like square foot of skull space that we inhabit. So that's
stem cell.
Sorry?
Grow its own stem cells.
Yeah, it could grow its own. It could do all sorts of things. Yeah, yeah. So that's it.
Okay, well we always finish up at 9 o'clock because some people have got trains to catch and so on. So are you happy to talk to people for a few minutes?
Sure, I'm happy to answer any questions or talk to people. Yep.
Just before, I don't mean, we've got to say thank you first and I meant sort of individually rather than as a group because I think I'm going to finish up now. Did you say that's available on
Yeah, I can make it available and provide you with a link.
All right. If you provide me with a link, I can then circulate everybody. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we sort of had a bit of discussion as we went along. So, but Adam will be around for a few minutes longer if anybody wants to raise specific issues on it. But we'll call the formal business to an end. So we'll just end up by thanking him very much for his presentation.
Okay, so I hope that's been thought-provoking. Is there any questions? You had a question?
So anybody who wants to leave can go now, but people who want to talk can.
I felt watching the presentation
Yes?
that when you talk about a lot of what you talk about being sensitive to physical suffering, disease, illness, pain in the body. If you're going to get rid of all sorrow, different words in our lives, what people would be?
Yeah, I don't know.
And I think that's a big question.
That's a
how much we want, but as a poet and a like seeing it dismissed, and I do wonder how will you recognise you have the joyful forever after if you have no sorrow to compare it?
So there's a, it's not that, I don't believe that like happiness should be compulsory, but if you had a choice about your mental makeup and it gave you the ability to choose between suffering or not suffering, then you could suffer when you wanted to, if you wanted, as a poetic inspiration, for instance. And then you could bliss out whenever you wanted to. At the moment, sometimes it's just really not a choice. It's our biology regulates our feelings, our internal state, our level of happiness quite a lot. Now, I don't think suffering is necessary for art, all art. I don't think that's a necessary condition, personally. Yeah. But it's like if I were to say, okay, well then people in society should suffer so they can create the art that we enjoy, then isn't that just like putting people in a coliseum and watching them sort of suffer there just for our enjoyment as well?
Well, I wasn't only meaning poetry in that sense. I suppose that, for want of a different wording in this group, there's a spiritual side which I feel most humans have deliberately forgotten of, and I think it's the spiritual side, if you like, that I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
And that's feeling sorrow or overcoming it or coping with that is one of the aspects of our life. It's one of the things that I think is very challenging.
Yeah. There's a couple of responses that David would give. One of them is if like you take like certain forms of spiritualism that we know, people have people are Christians or they're Buddhists or Islamists. I know, but I'm just saying this is one way to answer the question. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know what your experience of spiritualism is, or feeling spiritual is, but it's a pretty hard to define concept. So I'm just trying to make it easy to answer. But so in the text of Islam and Bible, God is supposed to be willing and omnipotent and just. I don't think that God would be like an angry God who just want people to suffer all the time. If God can think up ways that we can suffer less, if He can give us brains to do that, then why should we not use that capacity? So and then the Buddhist example is
I have another question. You showed a series of cartoons there, laughing guy.
Sorry?
There were two cartoons, the laughing guy.
Yeah, they're memes. Yeah, common memes.
I was just wondering, the non-laughing chap looked very much like an ex-Prime Minister of Australia who said life is not meant to be easy.
Yeah.
Was it, with the thick eyebrows? Was it really?
No, it wasn't.
Meant to be John Howard?
No. Yeah. Yeah, so like Nietzsche also said, whatever doesn't kill us makes us stronger. But it's kind of implying that we should go out there and seek suffering in order to become better people. But I don't think it follows that suffering is the only path to becoming a better person. People actually can achieve like amazing things in their life by being happy, by taking happy paths in life, So yeah,
I found it a very fascinating evening. These are just things.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Come back and give us the last part.
Really, I mean, I should have just focused on one aspect of transhumanism if I really wanted to do each part justice. but I thought I might just skim over a whole lot of it. So it gave you an overview.
But you just went to the advertising.
Yeah.
You only just scratched
Yeah.
the surface.
Well, it's really important, I think, to think about these things so that we can make more informed and educated, wise decisions about these sorts of things. Because if suddenly technological advances allow for certain technologies to come on the scene really quickly, and we don't have any precedence of thinking about the technologies and its social impacts or personal impacts, then it's quite likely that we'll have a knee-jerk reaction to the technologies which might not be beneficial, right? Yes.
I think you have technological advances.
Yep.
If you've got
A very what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our problem today is a lot of trouble. People worry about the old age. You also have people who can't get a job. They're probably equally as capable as somebody in the 50s.
Yeah.
In the 30s.
Yes. Yeah, I understand.
They can't get a job. So, the other thing which I find difficult with your talk is the fact you talk about us, whereas there's a whole lot of we, there's a whole lot of different we's. If you go to South Africa, why not raise the standard of medical care in South Africa so that they get 10 years behind their longevity?
So I tried to be clear about that, and you did bring this up before, and I did say that when I said us, look, I'm fumbling like often with English sometimes when I'm thinking on the spot. There's probably a better way of discussing it, but I don't think that I'm like an authority on how society should be configured in Africa or the world, right? So I do believe that we should be thinking about how social systems should be formed with some advisements on like futurists. So futurists should advise town planners, should advise politicians about some of the probabilities of high technology coming onto the scene soon. Now, some of this high technology will make access to technology cheaper and easier. Okay?
Some people have access to it because they've got the money or resources or whatever to do it, or they have to walk or whatever.
So there's a couple of things you can do about that. You can focus energy on distributing technology more evenly that we already have. After all, what's his name? Like an author said, we already live in the future, it's just not equally distributed, right? I'd say yet. If we had more advanced technologies that would include distributive technologies of distribution, then that would help solve this problem. But we should also focus on using some of the technologies and some of the power, the resources to distribute the technologies we have to suffering nations today. I'm not saying focus all energy on like developing new technologies to help our future selves. I hope that didn't come across it that way.
Can you foresee the time when we might be able to share minds with other people?
Well, I think so. Like, in a sense, we do share a very rudimentary form of mind when we communicate. When we're talking with each other, we're actually sharing experience. In the future, maybe with the internet, especially we've been able to communicate a lot more quickly over long distances and a lot more precisely intense. We can send emails with specific pointers to more detailed descriptions of information, Wikipedia or journals or whatnot. So academics can communicate a hell of a lot easier than what they used to in the past.
Information, there's feelings and why people believe certain things.
Well, you can share it like feeling and poetry in a form of like a language. I think that's a form. People won't be experiencing your particular phenomenal experience, but they'll be reading your poetry or seeing your art or something and experiencing something. And some of what they experience will be informed by the intention behind your poetry or art. You write a sad song, some people might feel sad when they're listening to it. Yeah, but in the future, sure, I think that if we do develop technology, brain-computer interfaces may be able to more accurately represent people's internal models and then help communicate those to other people. I'm not sure whether we'll be able to directly experience other people's pain or suffering. Maybe, maybe not. Yeah.
Changing the subject,
Yep.
is Lance Armstrong a transhumanist?
I don't know.
Because he's using artificial means to enhance his performance. And
Oh, you mean like, is this the doping guy?
yeah.
Yeah. So Julian Savulescu's spoken about Lance Armstrong. I don't have a problem. I mean, if people can use drugs to make them more fit, okay, maybe side effects, if all else is being equal, then why not?
So his main mistake was not making the drugs generally available.
Sure. Well, I don't know, because some drugs have negative side effects too, right?
Yeah.
And it could cause, if drugs are available in sport to, the completely unregulated use of drugs is available in sport. I'm not sure how it would play out. Maybe there'd be an arms race, who can take the most drugs to sprint the fastest, and then people would be dying left, right and centre because of side effects, heart attacks and all sorts of
They'd be
things.
dying with a gold medal.
Yeah, well, maybe if they could die at the end of the race without actually getting the medal. They may have won, but that's
Falling over the line.
yeah.
A question, it's really common.
Yep.
I just come back after just over 3 weeks in India.
Oh yes, how was that?
And I got to tell you, this thing in India is in the hands of the poorest of the poor.
Yeah, it's amazing.
There's millions of them.
Yeah.
1.2 billion population, so 500,000. I'd say
Access to the sum of human knowledge.
incredible, and you can set your messages cost you less than 1/10 of 1 cent to send messages. Phone calls are nothing, 50%, and everybody uses it.
Yeah.
And some of 2 cents, and you've got people asking for the chauffeurs to come up to bring their cars up, or ordering vegetables from the hawkers in the streets, who's to shout, Sabzi wala. No, he doesn't. He just goes, text message, how's the
It's amazing. That's a great story.
And he gets it there, they relay it all around, they
Yeah.
buy from them. It's incredible. So here is a real example.
Complaining would be much cheaper because all the call centres are much closer.
One of the things that the Turkish government did was to put solar panels on every home
Wow.
and a dish and a television dish. So their walls and their roofs are barely there, but they've got that technology because they make it that's cheap and they give it to the people. So they're listening. They're becoming more intelligent, of course, because they're learning more.
Yeah.
So this is right. I mean, the more it is, the cheaper it is.
That's exactly right. It's an amazing story. Yeah. Well, I think that would be a massive step in the right direction. I don't think access to technology is just the only thing we should worry about. I think we should have regulated access to some technologies. We don't want everybody carrying around a nuclear weapon in their pocket, or people sort of psychopaths rewriting some anthrax virus, making it even worse and unleashing that because I think it's a really fun thing to do. What teenagers do stuff for just stupid reasons and just for fun, even adults, right? It's not too long ago we used to go around hunting and killing animals just for the hell of it, for fun. I mean, it still happens today, but it happens a lot less. A lot less people think that that's a good idea.
That's right, because we're training one another to be more empathetic and to understand their lives.
Yeah.
They're not, because once upon a time we used to think that animals didn't have, there's no reason, like we could do what we liked.
Yeah.
And now we're realising, of course, that animals are animals. I mean,
Yeah.
they've got every right to be here as much as we do.
Well, that's the thing. It's possible that in the future we may be able to develop some form of Dr. Dolittle technology and really get a much richer experience of what it's like to be an animal in the future.
Yes.
Right?
And then the morals,
And
that
then-
would be
Yeah.
perfect.